In Print Radio. In Print is a professional writers organization located in Rockford, Illinois. We're dedicated to providing resources and education off the page and on the air. Hello, I'm Bob Francis. Today, In Print member Philip Warden talks with bestselling author Kimberla Lawson Roby.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if you remember this, but you were actually my very first in-print meeting.
Oh, wow.
You were the speaker there.
Yeah.
It was, I want to say November 2014.
That sounds about right, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And your words just inspired me. One that actually, I think a teacher had asked you something, and you just went into like a lot of detail. And he's like, why, when I ask you for the time, do you build me a clock?
Exactly. And that's so fresh in my mind. Literally, I was just talking about that yesterday. And for the holiday, my husband and I had a couple of friends over. It was really his friend and girlfriend. And so they were just kind of asking me, it's like, oh, you write, and, how did you start? And, did you always know? That's usually the question, because so many writers will say they knew as small children that they wanted to be writers, and that wasn't the case for me. But then, of course, when I decided, I really do want to try writing a book, I thought back, how far can I go when I first started hearing it? And it was my teacher, Mr. Groff, in 6th grade. And literally that's what he just finally said one day. Because if he said, if I assign the class a paragraph, then the next day I'd turn in a whole page. And if he said, tonight I want the class to write 1 full page, then I'd turn in 2 or 3. And it was always that way with us. And it seemed like I could never do it in just a small amount of space. I had a lot more to say than what he was asking for.
I know exactly how that feels. That was the same with me.
Yeah.
So you said you didn't know as a little kid, but you sort of started hearing the voice. When did that happen? Why did you become a writer?
Gosh, I was 30 years old before I ever said, you know what, I think I will sit down and start writing. So going back to elementary school, my teachers in junior high, I had a journalism class in 7th and 8th grade at Eisenhower, and heard the same thing from him. And, in high school, and by the time I was getting toward the end of high school, though, I started thinking, maybe I should consider it, because I've heard it enough from so many teachers now that you have a gift for writing and storytelling, and you should really think about pursuing a career in it. But I started looking at the salaries of writers versus people who majored in business. And that sort of changed everything. And, that's still now, of course, also the reason now when I speak to students, whether it's in high school or college, I'll tell them, don't make the mistake that I made. Don't let money and, how much you're going to earn for a living be the deciding factor when you're trying to figure out what it is you're supposed to do in this life. If you have a passion, figure out that, follow that, find your purpose. But for me, I didn't. And so I did go on to major in business, both for my associate degree and for my bachelor's degree, and worked at a number of different jobs, always kind of in the business arena, and always felt like something was missing. And I just kept feeling like that more and more, and wasn't moving up the career ladder corporate-wise the way I really knew I should be. And even though I was doing well with it, something still just seemed like, okay, there's this void. And that's when I thought, let me think back to what my teacher said and what others have said over the years. And writing just kept coming up on the list, at the top of the list. And I thought, I'm going to give this a try. And so while working as a full-time financial analyst for the city, I started writing every evening and weekends and holidays. And that's sort of how I wrote my first book.
And did you start with that idea, or did you try to do like short stories or poems, or try to do something small and then big, or did you just start out big?
I started out just with the book, and that's not always the most common thing. And I didn't realize that until I started trying to submit and find a literary agent to represent me. And then when I was rejected by all the agents that I sent my query letters to, then I submitted directly to a few editors at some of the major houses. And I finally got a letter where it wasn't a forum rejection, and one of the editors said, we can see the talent in terms of writing and rendering interesting characters and storylines, but you don't have any writing credits. So I had not written short stories or poems or even articles. And so she had said to me, it's very hard to get the publishing house behind a writer who doesn't have any writing credits. And so that was not really a plus. That was really a minus for me in that respect, because I didn't have anything to go on. But that's a little different, because I have lots of writer friends who, they had published articles and published short stories before they ever went on to start writing an actual novel or a nonfiction book.
How did the process sort of form in terms of getting the query letters out, getting the rejections back? Were you disheartened at all by the rejections, or did you say, oh, well, this is just a stepping stone, just on to the next thing?
It was disheartening. And, I was really actually disappointed to the level of, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this. I loved writing the book. I enjoyed it. I was already, gearing up and looking forward to writing my second book, and just thought this was a great experience. But I thought, well, this isn't working. And so was ready to give up. But then I thought, well, you know what? Editors at publishing houses, they really want you to have an agent. But since I can't find one, this is kind of my last resort. And so that's when I started submitting directly to the publishing houses. But once again, I was rejected by every single one. That's when I was pretty much completely discouraged. And I thought, this is it, and I'm going to move on. And that's that. And so my mom kept hearing me say that. And she said, well, I understand how you're feeling. I know you're disappointed and that you want to give up, but I don't think you should do that. And she said, I don't know anything about publishing and how it works, but what I know is that we've passed around lots of copies of your manuscript to so many readers here locally, and they're saying they couldn't put the book down until they finished it, and I think that means something. And so I heard her, still kind of thought, but I just don't want. I think it's just you get to the point where you don't want to keep going through rejection. You don't want to keep hearing no, and so that's just not something I was interested in. And then finally, my husband was the one who said, I agree with your mom, and you have this background in business. Why can't you just start your own company and publish the book yourself? And that's when I started researching self-publishing, read the books that I could find on that, and realized this was something doable. I knew the difference was we were going to have to invest quite a bit of money and take a risk that kind of scared me a little bit, because I didn't know how this was going to turn out. But that's how self-publishing came about, and I did move forward with it, and that's how my first book was kind of put out there.
Nice. You had a lot of support from people who really did not know anything about writing. How important is that, do you believe?
That's really important. And I think that goes whether you're talking about writing or any dream or goal that someone might have. You need to have a support system and folks who are around you who are really rooting for you to do the best that you can. People who not only are just they're rooting for you, but they want to see your dream come to pass as much as you do. Sometimes I look back on my husband and my mom and my two brothers and some of my very close friends and family members, almost that it seemed as though they wanted it more than I did. And that really made the difference. And when I was writing, of course, with a full-time job, that meant I couldn't write and do everything else. So my husband said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You will come home and you will write. I'll make sure we have food, and some of the responsibilities that you would have around the house, I'll take care of that. If he was working really long hours on a certain week, then my mom would say, I'm going to pick up the clothes and, I'll wash them, or I'm going to cook food so you guys have it for 2 or 3 days. And my brothers would literally call me after work and say, are you getting ready to write? And so it really just became this team effort, and it makes a difference. I remember starting to say to a couple of people I knew that I'm writing a book, and that's when I kind of gotten in the middle of the process. And I remember them looking at me as if, wow, that's nice, but almost like it was no big deal. And in one instance, there was a friend, and I don't think she really meant anything by it, but I just think when you say you're writing a book, it's so out of the ordinary that people can't really see that necessarily in the same respect that you do. And her look on her face was, that's nice, but that won't likely happen. I mean, I could just see it without her saying it. And from that moment, I think it almost kind of made me think, yeah, you're right. Who am I to think that I can actually write a book and get it published? And I thought, you know what? I can't tell people anymore, because if I do and I get that kind of reaction, I knew I was going to stop. I knew I wasn't going to continue. And so it was not until the book was complete and I was literally in the process of self-publishing it that I started telling people again.
How many books do you have so far?
The book, I just last Monday submitted my 25th title 25th, yeah, and my 24th will be out next month.
Wow. I wanted to also go back to that whole, that won't likely happen thing, because actually I have been told that recently. I have plans for 16 books for my series as well. And I was told, oh, that's nice, but that probably won't happen. So yeah, that hits deep with me too.
And it does, and you can't listen to it. And sometimes when you're talking about a series, even, people will think that, but I'm telling you personally not to give up, because my book that comes out June 21st is the 13th in my series. So it's possible. You can do whatever you know is in your heart, and you kind of have to just say, I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And so regardless of who the naysayers are, you really have to move beyond that.
Do you have any support from people who are actually writers or editors or publishers? What are their reactions like when you come to them with ideas or with any thoughts about your books?
Well, I obviously have been published for a long time because I self-published the first book, but I've had an actual publisher in New York for every book since then. And so I've had 3 publishers. My first was Kensington Publishing. That was for my second, third, and fourth book. And then maybe the next 8 or so was with HarperCollins under the William Morrow imprint. And then now I've been with Hachette under the Grand Central Publishing imprint for the last maybe 7 or 8. But, I have really the most supportive publishing team, from my editor, my primary editor, my manuscript editor, the publicity department, sales department, the president of the company, the CEO of the company, where it's just this full team effort with the marketing department. And so when you see a book jacket, they've consulted with me. They allow me to do that. And they don't have to do that, but they allow me to do that. They'll say, look, now your reader. So what do you think they want to see? And when I'm writing certain storylines, I will get the feedback and the suggestions from my editor, but they also listen to why maybe I don't want to make a certain change, or maybe I really do want to leave this in because this is what readers will expect. And so that really makes a difference to have that kind of support and encouragement from the people who are publishing your work.
Let's pause here to take a break. You're listening to In Print Radio. In Print Radio. I'm Philip Warden, and I'm talking with Kimberla Lawson Roby. What is one of the things that, let's say, a non-writer should know in order to support a writer?
Well, the one thing is to really encourage the writer. I think that, yes, it's good to have constructive criticism, but mean-spirited criticism just because you didn't like a book, or you didn't like the way it was written, or you didn't like the characters or something that happened in the book. There's a very, very constructive way to say that versus the kind that will send a writer to tears. And so, I hear all sorts of stories, and sometimes I'll read reviews, and I think writers just think, wow, and especially now with online media, with social media, with the internet, people have a platform that they never used to have. And so it's very easy to sit and write something and not realize what that effect will be. And then in terms of supporting writers, in terms of buying a book, not everybody can buy every single book. None of us can afford to do that. That's just being logical. None of us can do that. But if you have an opportunity to support an author that you know, or maybe it's just a new writer that you don't even know, but by supporting them, you're allowing them to continue to do what they do. Because if the book sales are not where they need to be, publishers can't continue to offer that author a contract. I mean, it's a business for them. And so they have to look at that first and foremost before anything else.
And then you were talking about how your husband made sure that you had food and everything while you could write, and then your mother came and picked up the laundry. What are some of the ways that you helped support them?
Unfortunately, my mom passed away over a decade ago. But even then, I mean, she was everything. I was with her even the day she took her last breath. And I think that people support you and then you support them. So with my husband, he has this great love for fishing. That's just his passion. And it's been that way for years. If I think he could do that every single day, he would likely do it if we had that kind of weather here in the Midwest. So whatever he wants to do, you know, whether it is fishing trip, whether it's something to do with his boat, whether it's the new fishing rod. I mean, I don't even question that because I just know that's what he loves. You know, when it comes to my brothers, I'm totally supportive of every single thing that they do if it's my friend. So, you know, none of them write, with the exception of a first cousin of mine. So we support each other, obviously, together because we do the same thing. But with everybody else, it doesn't matter what their passion in life is or what it is they want to do. I'm behind them 100%.
How long did your first book take?
So I started in April 1995 and I was finished in December. So it was about 7 months total. But by the time I went through the rewrites and the editing and proofing and all of that, it was about that period of time.
Mine has taken a little longer, and so some people have been like, it's been this long. Why isn't it done yet?
And are you writing fiction?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I'm writing fiction. It hasn't gone as fast as I wanted, of course.
But it's different for everyone. I mean, I'll meet people who it's not even a year or 2 years. I'll meet people who say it was 5 or 10 years for them to really write it the way they want it. And especially if you're writing something, I think that may require a different kind of research, or it's really in-depth research. It just kind of depends. And every writer is different. But that's not to say that you're not going to write the best book out there.
I actually interviewed someone who had started an autobiography, put it away, kind of locked it up, came back, I believe it was 50 years or 60 years later, and finished it. What is your writing process like?
I start with an issue. So I have a long list of real life social issues that I've kind of jotted down over the years in the same old notebook that I've had forever and a day. And if you saw it, you know that I really have had it for a lot of years. And the reason I write about real life social issues is, for one thing, I'm interested in it. It's the kind of thing I like to read about. But after Behind Closed Doors came out, which was my debut novel, I started hearing back from readers. And I wanted to know why they had enjoyed it, just to get an idea of who my audience was. And what I heard over and over and more often than not was I could relate to the stories. This had really happened to me, or it really happened to a friend or a family member or a coworker, or I had to overcome some of the same obstacles that your characters did. And so I thought, wow, this is what I want to stick to. And so what I do is I start out with a real life social issue, and then I build and create my characters around that issue. And then I write a 3-page synopsis, and then I start outlining the individual chapters. I will usually outline no less than 15 and usually around 20 chapters before I ever start writing. And so once I have that outline in place and I'm ready to go back and start writing chapter 1, I'll read that 1-page or 2-page synopsis, and I'll write that and turn that into, say, 8 to 10, 12 pages, whatever amount of pages that full chapter will be. I'll read that outline that I've written for chapter 2, and I'll write that chapter, and I'll keep doing that. And things will change because once the characters really take on a life of their own, they tell the story, and sometimes they tell it in a way I wasn't counting or planning for, and it just goes from there. And then after that, it's really just spontaneous, and I don't know where it's going. I have author friends and just authors that I've met along the way that will tell me they are trying to get to the ending that they know is going to happen. They automatically know the ending of their story. I never know the ending until about 2 or 3 chapters before I finish it. Never, ever. Not for any book could I have told you the ending until I got to that point.
It's just so great when the characters just become themselves.
Yeah.
I had a suggestion given to me about a character that their whole personality actually changes to something else.
Yes.
And I just reacted so fiercely to that. I'm like, no, you don't understand.
You don't want to do that.
No,
that's not what
that's
I
not
want
them.
you to do. No, not at all. And I've had that happen. I think my first experience of knowing that the character really takes over, and this was with maybe the second book that I really paid attention to it, was there was a character who had really been hurt and betrayed in a way, and the pain was so deep, and just the feeling that she had when she was responding to the person who had hurt her, the anger that she had, I could feel the frown in my face as I was typing her dialogue. That's when I realized, because clearly it wasn't happening to me, and that experience wasn't even something I had, but the frown was there as if it was her literally writing and typing that. And I just had something happen recently with the book that I submitted for next year where the character said something. And I thought, wow, what an awful thing to say. It was as if I had heard somebody say that. And that's what my response would have been, like, wow, how could you say that to somebody? And so, yeah, that's kind of the fun part of what we do.
Going back to the processing, do you need quiet, or Do you make music, soundtrack, and listen to that while you write?
Total silence. And I wish that weren't the case because, I read, sometimes I follow a lot of readers or writers online, and I'll hear them say they will listen to music that sets the tone for that particular scene that they're writing, that particular character or that chapter. And no, I have to have, and I mean total silence. And so much so that my best writing is done if I take 7 days and lock myself away in a hotel. And I only talk to my husband, when I get up, when I take breaks to eat, and before I go to bed. And I have my voicemail set for people who, so they know if this isn't an emergency, I likely won't be calling you back for the next week or a couple of weeks. Total silence. And for me, it has to be just me and the characters with no kinds of interruption.
So literally behind closed doors.
Literally.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about this series that you've written, the Reverend Curtis Black series. Mm-hmm. How did that even start? It's just such a very interesting concept.
To talk about corruption and scandal and problems in the church, and it's different and it's interesting, I think, because that's pretty controversial. When you're talking about religion and Christianity and God and people who stand in a pulpit on Sunday morning saying one thing, but doing something totally different, that kind of gets people either shaking their heads or kind of, giving you the side eye or just wondering, wow, does that really happen? And unfortunately it does. It just wasn't talked about as much. And it really, once again, was sort of a behind closed doors sort of scenario. But when I wrote the first two books and had focused on real life issues, once again, when I was ready to submit a short synopsis to my publisher to let them know what I was getting ready to do for book 3, I said to my husband, I want to stay in the same genre. I want to write about things that really happen. And even if they are taboo or controversial, even if they make people uncomfortable when they're talking about it or reading it. And he said, well, what about some of the issues that go on in churches? And I thought, wow, I think I maybe will take a look at that. And I did. And I knew some of what had gone on in churches locally and knew that it was crossing denominations. It was crossing all racial lines, financial statuses, social statuses, that sometimes people weren't who they said they were. And that's really how it began. And I created this character, Reverend Curtis Black, and showed what it was like for his wife and his child and how the congregation was being affected and how people really, in a sense, being manipulated and not seeing what they should be seeing from their leader.
So did you name him Curtis Black because of dirty dealings and the sins?
Mm-hmm. I never even thought about it. He was just Curtis Black to me. That's who I saw as I created the character mentally. So it's kind of ironic that his name does represent that.
And your latest one is A Sinful Calling.
Yes.
Takes place in Mitchell, Illinois. Mm-hmm. Why Illinois?
I guess born and raised, still reside myself. And so I know Illinois like the back of my hand, whether we're talking about here, if we're talking about an hour away or Southern Illinois, Northern, it doesn't make any difference. But yeah, so Mitchell doesn't exist. Mitchell is a fictitious city. However, it is 90 miles northwest of Chicago.
So this takes place with a guy named Dylan. Who is Dylan in this series? Why is he here?
Dylan is the eldest child of Reverend Curtis Black. However, he's the long-lost child. He was estranged, and he's someone that nobody knew about except Curtis until just the last 2 years. And so now in this book, he is a little beyond 30 years old, and he came about. This is a child that Curtis had before he was married and denied, never had anything to do with. And Dylan has come full circle. But Dylan is struggling because he wants a relationship with his dad the same as his siblings have had all of their lives. And that's just not the case. They just don't have that kind of relationship. He tried to build that. And when things didn't turn out the way that he wanted, he tried to blackmail his dad. That didn't turn out well from him. And he left and moved to Atlanta. Now in A Sinful Calling, he's back. He has his own church. church. He's not been called by God. He admits to himself that he's not. He's called himself. He sees this as a career choice. He has 1,000 members, and his goal in life is to have a much bigger position in the community and a much larger church than his dad has, and he sees himself as being in competition with him.
I see it kind of ironic that he's following in his father's footsteps in order to smite him, for lack of a better word. And you said he called himself to minister. Why is that considered taboo?
It's considered taboo because for most, and not all, in Christianity in general and traditionally, most men of God, women of God will say that God called them into the ministry, that they knew this was the calling on their life. The same as for me, I feel like the calling on my life is to write books. And for you, if you know that's your passion and that's your purpose, and you feel like this is what I know I was brought into this world for, this is what I'm supposed to do. But with ministry, it's on a different level because now you have become this leader who's supposed to have a certain set of moral values and family values and a certain level of integrity because people are looking up to you. People are expecting you to live your life in a certain way. But to now say, I kind of believe in God and I kind of want to do the right thing, but even if I don't, it's okay. I just see this as a way of earning money. And for Dylan, that's what it is. And not even so much money as it is, I want to have a certain amount of power and I want to have a certain amount of prestige and I want this position in the community. I want to be this prominent person. And those are his reasons. And those are all the wrong reasons to be a pastor of a church.
We need to take a break, but we'll be back in a moment. You're listening to In Print Radio. Welcome back. I'm speaking with New York Times bestselling author of the Reverend Curtis Black series, Kimberla Lawson Roby. When I was reading this book, the only time I set it down was when I had to. And I think the only regret I actually had about this book was that I had not read the ones before. Okay. But I'm really glad because you backtracked to what these characters were thinking, how these characters sort of fit together. And one thing actually I do want to know is, how did these characters get picked for this story?
Well, with this being the 13th title, and I've kind of started doing it over the last few, Curtis has come full circle. He started out being this man who was consumed with money and power and women, and he was just an awful individual, to say it in the plainest way that I can. And he just wanted what he wanted. He was willing to do whatever he had to in order to get it. He didn't care who he hurt in the process. And so he suffered a lot of consequences from that. We all reap what we sow. And so he did a lot of bad things and he had to pay the price for that. His family members, his children have had to pay the price for it. But he finally arrived at a point after many years of saying, no more. I don't want to be this bad person anymore. I want to be a good person. I want to be a true man of God and I want to do the right thing and I want to be a good father and a great husband. But now he has this offspring. He has children who have watched him, who have followed his example, unfortunately. And so now you have Dylan. And so now I've started to write about the children who are adults. And so in A Sinful Calling, it's Dylan as well as his sister. Alicia is not an awful person on the same level as her brother, but she has lots of issues and she's done bad things, particularly when she was married the first time. And her first husband, is now deceased, and it has a lot to do with the way she treated him.
One of the characters has a mental illness. What made you want to put a mental illness in the story?
I think another reason, part of it is the idea of writing about one real life issue. So of course with Dylan, it is the corruption in the church and this great need of his to build a relationship with a dad who, for lots of reasons, doesn't want to have that kind of relationship with him. And then with her, it was the mental illness, because I think so many times we overlook mental illness. We may have family members, we may have friends who are struggling with it, and we don't think it's as serious as it is. We think, people will just eventually be okay. In the case of Alicia, who deals with it, she's ashamed to tell anybody that she's struggling with this because how will people see me? And she takes it to another level because her dad is so well known, not just locally or nationally, but worldwide. Once everybody finds out, that's a whole other scandal now, for the family. And so she deals with that. Think about how many people commit suicide because they've done exactly what she did. Most people who committed suicide just couldn't, no matter how much they wanted to or knew they should, tell somebody else. They just never arrived at a point where they thought they even had people they could do that with. That's a lot of it. Some people don't feel like they have somebody who's going to understand, who's going to take it serious, and who's going to help them get the help that they need.
One of the other things I noticed in here, you have brand names, Disney and I believe Lexus in there. Mm-hmm. Do you have to ask permission for these for this book, or could you just write it?
I could write it, and I think there's a line that you don't want to cross, but obviously if I'm mentioning Disney in a good light, and I'm mentioning Lexus in a good light, I think to some degree that's probably almost free advertisement. Sometimes the publishers don't necessarily want you to do it because they feel like they're giving, free advertisement. So I think that if you were saying something negative, something that would fall into the line of not making them look so good, I think that would be a problem, but that's not something I ever do.
I really enjoyed this book, and through all the hardships and the struggles with the characters, I felt drawn into that family. And I must say, the ending, did not see that coming. It was amazing to figure that out.
Well, I'm glad. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. And you're always happy as a writer, as you know, even as writing, even though you haven't finished, is that's what you want to hear, that somebody didn't see something coming, because you don't want it to be so totally and completely predictable. I think some things you can't get beyond. I mean, they have to be predictable, but that grand finale, you're hoping that people weren't looking for that.
We have to take a break, but we'll be back with more of my interview with Kimberla Lawson Roby right after this. We're back. I'm Philip Warden, and I'm talking with Kimberla Lawson Roby. You said you just submitted something. What's the future projects about? Is it a continuation of this series, or is it something completely standalone?
I have already submitted the 3-page synopsis for the next Reverend Curtis Black story that will pick up after A Sinful Calling. But the book that I just submitted is my standalone. It's a short novella, and it's called Copycat. And it is not copycat in the way most people will think. We think serial killer for the most part. But this is a copycat who is a woman who is a brand new writer. So she's not published, but she's finished her first book. She's excited about writing, but she works as an insurance claims adjuster by day. And she just so happens to meet another author who lives there locally. And that author has written a couple of books and is preparing for the release of her third. And they randomly meet at a hair salon. And it's not so much about the fact that they are writers as it is that she becomes almost obsessed with the idea of being exactly like her friend, because they become very good friends. She sees her hairstyle and thinks, I don't want short hair anymore, because she doesn't have short hair. She sees her carry a certain purse and she thinks, wow, that's the color purse I want. I don't like this color anymore. She sees her with certain mannerisms when she's doing interviews, and she sees her handle life in a certain way. She sees her post certain motivational thoughts or scriptures on social media, and so now she thinks that's what she needs to do every single day. And so it becomes a real copycat situation from a behavioral standpoint.
Since they're both writers, she decides to copycat her work.
Well, somewhere
plagiarism
down the road,
right there.
There's going to have to be a little bit of something. Yeah. Because she believes, and I think it gets to a point for her that she's really lost a sense of identity, that she doesn't even know who she is anymore. And that's where the real problem comes in.
And as a writer, you do want identity with your work.
And you do. And so I say to young writers, or even writers that are not so young, but they're just new and they're aspiring and they're working toward, and they're even at a point sometimes of trying to get published. But as you're writing, know that the worst thing you can do is mimic another writer. We all have our own individual writing styles, even if we write in the same genre. If you're a romance writer, if you're a mystery writer, if you write historical fiction, if you write suspense, thriller, no matter what it is, it may be along the same line, but a person ought to be able to pick up a book and say, I know that this is Kimberla Lawson Roby's. I know this is Phil's work. I know this is Bob's. This is somebody else's. You ought to be able to say, no, that's not somebody else. You'll know the difference.
Yeah, and that reminds me about, I believe something that Jackie Chan said. He said he did not want to be the next Bruce Lee.
Yes.
He wanted to be the first Jackie Chan.
Exactly. And he was. Totally different. We loved Bruce Lee for who he was and what he did, but when we saw Jackie Chan, we really could tell that we could distinguish them and still like both of them. Had I come up and just said, wow, I want to be this person, or that person, I don't think that would have had very much success. And I don't think that readers would have enjoyed it as much because it wouldn't have been genuine. Readers are very smart. Avid readers who love to read, they know when you haven't been true to yourself, and they know when something feels forced. And if you try to write like another writer, it'll show that. It just won't feel as natural to you when you're writing it.
Do you ever see yourself going on to another genre, maybe writing? Sort of like how J.K. Rowling went into sort of murder mysteries?
Yeah, and I've thought about it, and I think what I get asked, which is very interesting to me, that I write, adult fiction, but I also write about adult type issues, is that I get so many readers now saying, when are you going to write something for my daughter or son, and I get that a lot. That's the strangest thing for me. But when are you going to write something for, say, my 12 or 13-year-old? Because they're at an age where some of the stories that we call young adult, they're beyond that, because that generation is a little bit more advanced, in the way they think and the things they do and what they experience in junior high school and, preparing to go to high school. But maybe some of the adult fiction is too much. That's not what you want your child to read yet. And so you're kind of still looking for that middle ground. So I think I will likely consider that. I know one thing that I'm definitely going to start doing, my publisher is encouraging me to do it, is I'm going to start doing short stories, ebook short stories. And so it's just great. And that's why I was saying, it's like, I love my publisher. I say that in their faces and I say that behind their back, because when you have a publisher who says, we're going to still continue to publish your books, but this is another outlet. This is something we will even help cross promote because we think it would be great for your audience.
I do understand about the whole different thinking of the generation, and I do get asked, it's like, after you do this, are you going to do something else that someone else can read?
Yes.
And the answer is, I don't know.
You just kind of have to wait and see. And then the other thing I get, and this just started within the last maybe 4 or 5 years, and maybe it's because now I've written for as many years as I have, and, the audience has built and grown over the years. But what I get is, will you ever write a memoir? And it's my journey, what it's been like for me to not ever know that I was going to be a writer, as just similarly to what you're asking me today. When did you know, and why did you do it this way? And, what it's been like, the losses that I've had, my mother, losing her in that process, the most important person in my life, and what it's been like to get from A to Z. And I never thought about that before. I think we don't think our lives are interesting, because that's what I kind of always go on record saying. They'll say, well, how much of you are, is in your stories? I'm like, my life isn't interesting enough for it to really be sellable. You may get bits and pieces of me, what I believe. You're always going to usually see consequences if my characters do bad things, if they don't treat people in a really good way, because I do feel personally like, look, on this earth, we ought to treat people the way we want to be treated. We should love everybody. So you're going to see different things. Or maybe a character, has salmon too many times. That's because, I like salmon. I definitely do, So, but for the most part, you don't think your life is that interesting. So now to hear readers ask me at events, will you ever write a memoir? I had not considered it, but I think I likely will at some point.
I really like to read memoirs written by the actual people, autobiographies, not just biographies.
Yes.
To me, gives a more intimate approach to the entire life.
There's no doubt, because there's going to be something, I think, that I will likely include that I might not have felt comfortable telling somebody in an interview who was going to write it for me. You're very right about that.
I cannot tell you how many memoirs I've started and restarted in different notebooks.
Right. And do you think it's because a certain amount of time passes and you view the way your life is, or something else has happened that had not happened why do you think you restart it?
I do understand that as a writer, books are weaknesses. So you try to write, but then you might get into reading more. And then you're like, wait a second, no, I got to go back to this.
Yes.
Does that happen to you? And how do you solve it if that does?
Well, this is the one thing, and this is my rule. I never, ever read another person's book while I'm writing the first draft of my novels. Nope, I don't read mine unless I want to refer. So with the series, sometimes I just need to make sure I have a fact right. Every now and then. For the most part, I've done this so long, I know all of my characters. Very little you could bring up to me about Curtis and his family that I wouldn't be able to tell you about. But sometimes, every now and then, I'll have to do that. For the most part, no, because I think I would never even be able to or even want to try to mimic another writer or pick up even the smallest part of a plot from another book. But I think if you're reading because books take you away, you're so engrossed in what you're reading, especially if it's a very good book and it's a great storyline, I think subliminally you might pick something up and something could come out on your page. Not that that could happen or that I know that it's happened, but I'm afraid that it will. And so that's just always been my rule, that I don't read while I'm writing the first draft.
That is a good rule. I wish that was my rule too. Of course, there goes the copycat. I want to thank you very much for, letting me read your book.
Well, thank you for reading it. I'm honored that you would do that and, to hear your feedback. And I just appreciate this opportunity as a whole.
And thank you for meeting with me today.
Thank you.